Every morning at 5 a.m., before the town of Maple Hollow had even begun to stir, a single warm light flickered on at the corner of Willow Street. No flashy signs, no jingles or neon, just a small, aging bakery with cracked wooden panels and the scent of something gentle rising with the dawn. Martha, slender, silver-haired, and quiet, unlocked the door like she had done for decades. Her hands, roughened by flour and time, moved with the calm rhythm of someone who didn't need to rush. The bread she baked was nothing extravagant, just warm, crusty loaves with soft centers. But for those who remembered how kindness tasted, it was the kind of bread that brought them back. No one in town really knew Martha. Some said she once had a big family. Others whispered of a tragedy she never spoke of. But nobody asked, partly out of respect, partly out of not knowing how. Then something began to shift. A boy. Skinny, silent, too young to be alone, too proud to beg. Every morning he stood by the lamppost across from the bakery. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He just watched the steam rise behind the glass, his eyes locked on the loaves as if trying to inhale the warmth through sheer will. And then, on a rainy Tuesday, Martha did something no one expected. She walked out, handed him a small loaf, still warm, still wrapped in paper, and simply said, "Here, just had one extra." He took it, quietly, gratefully. From that day forward, something invisible and powerful began to form between them. A silent ritual, a daily exchange. No names, no questions. Just one piece of bread. You see, sometimes the smallest act of kindness, done without expectation, becomes the first thread that holds someone's entire world together. Would you give something to someone, expecting nothing in return? Because maybe, just maybe, that one loaf could change everything. The rain had softened by morning, but the sidewalks still glistened as Martha opened her bakery. The scent of rising dough mingled with the distant hiss of tires on wet pavement. She moved through her routines as always, prepping trays, folding parchment, kneading by instinct. But something in her peripheral vision tugged gently at her awareness. He was there again, the same boy, maybe 9, maybe 10, wrapped in a jacket 2 sizes too big, sleeves swallowing his hands. His backpack was old, the zipper held together by a twisted paperclip. He stood at the same lamppost, unmoving, eyes fixed on the bakery window. Martha kept kneading. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, not yet. By 6:45 a.m., a batch of sourdough had just come out of the oven. She picked the smallest loaf, sliced it in half, and slipped in a bit of butter while it was still warm. Wrapped it in wax paper, tucked it into a brown bag. She didn't walk toward the boy. That would scare him. Instead, she stepped outside, placed the bag gently on the bench just outside her shop, and returned inside without a word. From behind the window, she pretended to check a tray. The boy waited, watched, and then, slowly, cautiously, he walked over. His hands trembled as he picked up the bag. He opened it just enough to see what was inside. The briefest smile, barely a flicker. Then he turned and disappeared down the street. The next morning, the same, he returned. Standing just across the road, just watching. Martha didn't speak. She simply repeated the ritual. One small loaf placed on the bench. By the time she looked again, it was gone. No thank you, no questions. Just absence where hunger used to be. By the end of the week, Martha noticed he always came around the same time, 6:40 a.m., and always left before 7. Once, she caught a glimpse of him walking toward the nearby elementary school. Another morning, she saw him open the bag and eat with a kind of urgency that wasn't just about food. It was about hiding, about surviving. Still, she never called out to him. She never asked where he lived or why he was alone. Because sometimes when someone is standing on the edge, what they need isn't a spotlight, it's a quiet place to land. By the second week, it had become something sacred. Every morning, just before sunrise, Martha would set out one warm loaf on the bench, sometimes with a little piece of cheese tucked inside, sometimes just plain and simple. She never saw the boy approach anymore. One moment the bag was there, the next, it wasn't. It was as if he were a ghost, quiet, precise, and grateful. But one morning, as she bent to place the bag down, she found something that hadn't been there the day before. A small note, folded tightly. No name, no envelope. Just a piece of lined notebook paper with childlike handwriting. "Thank you." 2 words, that was all. She read them twice, then tucked the paper into the pocket of her apron, as if it were something precious. From then on, the ritual deepened. She added a bottle of milk on colder days, a cookie on Fridays, sometimes a slice of orange or a hard-boiled egg wrapped in a napkin. Always humble, always something simple, but made with care. In return, the notes came, short, sparse, but deeply human. "The milk helped, thank you. I shared the cookie with a friend. You make me feel safe." Each one folded like a secret between souls who never spoke. Martha never replied, never wrote anything back. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was better that way. Maybe silence was the language they shared best. A language that didn't need to be explained. At the grocery store, someone asked her why she always bought extra milk. "At my age," she smiled, "you start forgetting how much you use." But she hadn't forgotten. Not once. In fact, it was the only part of her day she never had to write down or remind herself of. And yet, not everyone saw it as kindness. The town was small. People noticed patterns. A few of the regulars started asking questions. "Who's the bread for? Why give it away for free? You don't even know the kid." Martha shrugged. "He's hungry," she said softly. "That's all I need to know." One woman, a stern-faced customer who always ordered sugar-free muffins, scoffed. "You'll just encourage him to keep showing up. These kids, they learn to take advantage." But Martha only smiled and wrapped another loaf, because she knew something most people had forgotten. True kindness doesn't ask for a receipt. Still, there were days when doubt crept in, especially when the boy didn't appear. Twice, the bread stayed untouched on the bench until noon. Once, the milk curdled in the heat before she finally brought it back inside. Those days were the hardest. She'd find herself staring at the empty bench, heart heavier than the bread she baked. Wondering, worrying, hoping he was safe, hoping he hadn't disappeared for good. But then, just as she began to think the ritual might be over, the bag would vanish again, and another note would appear. "Sorry, had to hide, I'm okay. Thank you for not giving up." That last one made her cry, alone in the back room as the bread rose in the oven. She had spent years in quiet, unseen grief. But now, each day held a strange new purpose. A silent reminder that somewhere out there, someone depended on her. Not for charity, not out of obligation, but for something softer. Consistency, safety, warmth. She still didn't know his name. She didn't need to. Some connections weren't built on information. They were built on presence. Every morning, same time, same bench, same brown bag. No words, no expectations. Just 2 people. One giving, one receiving. And both, in their own way, healing. The first morning the bag wasn't taken, Martha thought it was just a fluke. Perhaps the boy had overslept. Maybe it was raining too hard. Kids get sick or distracted. She left the loaf on the bench and waited. Hours passed. The bread went cold. The milk grew warm. By closing time, the bag was still there, untouched. She brought it back inside, heart tight in her chest, trying to reason with herself. Tomorrow, he'll come tomorrow. But the next morning, the bench stayed empty, and the next, and the one after that. 5 days passed. No boy, no note. By the 7th morning, Martha stood at the doorway longer than usual. She didn't bring out any bread, didn't make an extra loaf, just stood there, staring at the wooden bench like it might give her an answer. It didn't. The emptiness was louder than silence. She felt the ache settle into her bones. Not the kind that came with age. This was different. This was the ache of disconnection, of unfinished stories, of not knowing whether someone had simply moved on or been lost forever. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where he came from, who he lived with, if anyone. She didn't even know what he liked most, the cookies or the soft rolls with butter. All she knew was that something fragile had formed between them, and now it was gone. She began leaving a smaller loaf on the bench every other day, just in case. Always wrapped, always warm, but always, heartbreakingly, still there by nightfall. "You're still feeding ghosts?" someone muttered outside the shop. Martha said nothing. Because what do you say to someone who's never known what it feels like to miss someone you never got to meet properly? 2 weeks later, just as the ache began to settle into resignation, she found it. Not on the bench, not folded under the bread bag. It came by mail. A plain white envelope, no return address. Her name written carefully in childish block letters. Miss Martha. Inside was a note, longer than any he had ever left before. Dear Miss Martha, I'm sorry I disappeared. Someone found out I was living alone. I wasn't supposed to be. My mom left a while ago and I didn't want to go into the system. I was scared they'd take me away from everything. But someone from school noticed, and now I live with my grandparents far from the city. They're nice. They make soup and let me keep my books. But I miss the mornings. I miss the bench. I miss the bread. I miss you. You never asked me who I was. You never made me feel like I was broken or wrong. You just gave me something warm and real when everything else felt cold and fake. I want you to know, you helped me more than anyone. Not just with food, with hope. Thank you for being the only person who saw me. Your friend, Eli. Martha sat down behind the counter, letter trembling in her hands, eyes brimming with something quiet and sacred. Eli. A name, a story, a goodbye. Not every story ends with a reunion. Sometimes it ends with a whisper from far away, just enough to remind you that your presence mattered. The next morning, Martha made a loaf anyway. She didn't put it on the bench. She placed it on a new shelf inside the bakery, next to Eli's letter, now framed behind glass. Above it, she wrote one sentence on a wooden plaque, "For the ones who disappear but are never forgotten." A month after the letter arrived, another envelope came. This time thicker, wrapped carefully in brown paper, with a faint scent of pine and dust. Inside was a photograph. In it, Eli stood in front of a small white house with a red roof, holding a paintbrush. His hair looked a little longer. He wore a too big flannel shirt and muddy sneakers. He looked taller somehow, more steady, but it wasn't Eli that made Martha's breath catch in her throat. It was what stood next to him, a wooden sign, freshly painted, nailed to a post in the front yard. The words, uneven but bold, read, "If you're hungry, knock, no questions asked." Just 6 words. 6 words that held within them every morning on that bench, every wrapped loaf, every unspoken moment of understanding between a woman who never asked and a boy who couldn't explain. Martha touched the photo as if it might make the memory more real. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she smiled softly, like someone witnessing a seed take root after a long winter. He remembered. More importantly, he passed it on. The world hadn't swallowed Eli. He hadn't disappeared into silence or shame. He'd taken what little warmth he'd been given and offered it back to someone else who might one day stand, hungry, unseen, on another street corner. Maybe a stranger, maybe a friend, maybe even another boy who thought no one noticed. The photograph went up beside the framed letter, both nestled among loaves and paper bags in warmth. Customers often asked about it, curious about the sign, the boy, the story. Martha never explained much. She would simply gesture to the words on the photo and say, "He didn't have much, but he gave what he had." And somehow, that was more than enough. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the streets of Maple Hollow like powdered sugar on Martha's morning loaves. The town moved slower. Breath came out in clouds. Scarves grew thicker, steps shorter. One morning, as Martha wiped condensation from the bakery window, she noticed something. A girl, maybe 7, small, wrapped in a faded hoodie, standing across the street, her eyes fixed on the display of bread rolls like they were something magical. Martha didn't hesitate. She walked out holding a small loaf, warm, soft, just out of the oven. No words, no explanation. She placed it gently on the same wooden bench. The girl looked up, eyes wide, then down at the bread, and without a word, she walked forward, picked it up, and held it to her chest like something sacred. Their eyes met just for a second, and Martha smiled. Not a smile of charity, not pity, but recognition. She'd seen that look before, in a boy named Eli. And maybe one day this little girl would hold a paintbrush beside her own front door, hammering in her own wooden sign. No one said anything. There was no applause, no audience. Just another quiet morning in a quiet town, where one small loaf found its way into the right hands. And that was enough, because kindness, real kindness, doesn't end. It echoes, it multiplies, it passes from hand to hand, heart to heart, one loaf at a time.